Morning everyone! In today's video we're going to recap the events of Macbeth's first act, as well as revise some of the key quotations of the act. There's a link to these slides below if you wish to use them. Now you may have seen Freytag's pyramid before. Essentially Freytag theorised that you can break pretty much every story into these 5 parts. Now we can overlay the 5-act structure of Macbeth over this, and the pyramid acts as a basic tension graph. And in Act 1, which we're going to focus on today, this is one of the longer acts in the play, but it's definitely one of the most important. It's this act where we're introduced to most of the key characters and their motivations, we're introduced to the key themes, and the plot gets started here too. Now at the end of the act, we get the inciting incident, which is what kicks the plot into motion, and in the case of Macbeth, the inciting incident would be the murder of King Duncan. Now Macbeth is a play where there are hundreds of significant and important quotes, so we won't get to cover them all, just a handful from each scene. That said, let's get started. Act 1, Scene 1 starts off with thunder and lightning. Shakespeare sets the tone of the play, letting the audience know that a wild storm of events will be overtaking the stage, and also introduces a supernatural element with the witches. The 3 witches have a conversation with each other, and a lot of the lines rhyme, perhaps to give us the feeling of a spell being cast. They speak almost in riddles, agreeing to meet again when the battle is lost and won, and they plan to meet with someone called Macbeth. And then they end the scene with the famous "fair is foul and foul is fair" quote. More on that later. Act 1 Scene 2 is where we get a sense of what's going on in Scotland, and an idea of Macbeth's reputation. Duncan, the King of Scotland, and his advisors meet a wounded captain, and we get a sense of what's happened. The captain tells us that an Irish rebel called Macdonald was battling the Scottish army, and you couldn't tell who would win. But brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name, took matters into his own hands, fought his way through the battlefield to face Macdonald, and he unseamed him from the nave to the chops and fixed his head upon our battlements, meaning Macbeth sliced Macdonald from his belly button all the way up to his jaw, chopped his head off and attached it to the castle wall, which also foreshadows Macbeth's death at the end of the play. The king seems excited about this and he agrees that Macbeth is brave, but the captain has even more news. He says that while the Scottish army were weak from fighting the Irish, the Norwegian king also attacked, but this just made Macbeth and Banquo fight even harder. Then King Duncan lets the man go and see a doctor. A man called Ross speaks to the king and says the Thane of Cawdor is a traitor and has helped the Norwegian king. He also praises Macbeth as Bellona's bridegroom, saying that Macbeth fights like he's the husband of the Roman goddess of war, and that meant that the Scots won the battle. Duncan says that they're going to execute the Thane of Cawdor, and as a reward they're going to promote Macbeth, making him the new Thane of Cawdor. Act 1 Scene 3 opens with the witches having a bit of a catch-up. They're telling each other about the witchy things that they've been getting up to, when along comes Macbeth and Banquo, fresh from battle. The first thing that we ever hear Macbeth say in person is "so foul and fair a day I have not seen," which immediately shows us a link between Macbeth and the witches from their "foul as fair and fair as foul" quote earlier. The witches give 3 statements in turn. "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth that shalt be king hereafter." Now these prophecies set the events of the play into motion. Banquo asks the witches to make him a prophecy, and they tell him he shall get kings though thou be none, meaning his descendants will be kings even if he isn't himself. The witches vanish, and then Ross arrives with the news that Macbeth has been given the title of Thane of Cawdor. Now as Macbeth is already the Thane of Glamis, that means that 2 of the witches' statements are true. Macbeth is shocked and asks, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" And he's told that Cawdor is a traitor and will be executed. Macbeth then starts to consider if murder is the best way of becoming king, or if fate will allow it to happen naturally, when he says, "If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir." In Act 1, Scene 4, King Duncan is speaking to his son Malcolm and mentions that you can't always trust everyone. He says there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face, meaning that you can never tell a person's thoughts and intentions just by looking at their face. Macbeth and Banquo enter and the king throws praise on them, telling them how amazing they are, and Macbeth replies with, "Our duties are to your throne," swearing his allegiance and his loyalties to the king. Duncan then announces that his son Malcolm will be the Prince of Cumberland, meaning that Malcolm is now the next in line to the throne. This tells Macbeth that fate won't allow him to become king unless he intervenes, so he says that Malcolm is in the way and he must either overstep him or fail at becoming king. Act 1 Scene 5 starts with Macbeth's wife reading a letter that he sent to her. In the letter, he tells Lady Macbeth about the witches and their predictions, and he refers to his wife as "my dearest partner of greatness," which tells us quite a lot about their relationship and of his opinion of her. And after reading the letter, Lady Macbeth notes that she will ensure that he becomes king, but she wonders if her husband has the heart to do what needs to be done. She says that he's too full of the milk of human kindness. Then a servant comes and tells her that the king is on his way, and that's all that she needs. She's got the plan immediately, and she predicts that this will be the death of the king, the fatal entrance of Duncan. But in order to do this, she speaks to the spirits and commands them to unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Now that little soliloquy is rich with quotations and connotations for Lady Macbeth. It's a really good source for quotes. Macbeth then turns up and she tells him that the king won't be alive tomorrow, but that Macbeth should hide his feelings and true intentions, and he should look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it. And then she tells him to leave all the rest to her. Act 1 Scene 6 is a short one. King Duncan turns up at the Macbeth's castle and he's over-complimentary about the house. Lady Macbeth says that it's an honour to have the king at her house. The king replies that, "Fair and noble hostess, we are your guests tonight," and states that he loves Macbeth and thinks highly of him. And then we have Act 1 Scene 7, the final scene of Act 1. It opens with Macbeth thinking out loud. He's weighing up the pros and cons of assassinating the king, and notes that it will probably come back to haunt him when he says that bloody instructions return to plague the inventor. He talks about how much of a great king Duncan has been, and then concludes that the only motivation he has is his own ambition, and vaulting ambition which overleaps itself. Ambition, he says, makes people rush ahead, not think things through properly, and leads to downfall. Lady Macbeth enters and they have a bit of an argument. Macbeth says he won't go through with the murder, and Lady Macbeth starts to call him a coward and to insult his masculinity with, "When you durst do it, then you were a man." She then tells Macbeth that she knows how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. "I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from its boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this." Now we get a sense of how ruthless and determined she is, and she holds Macbeth to the same standards. So then they run through the plan together one more time, and Macbeth concludes, "I am settled, and bend upon each corporal agent to this terrible feat." So after saying he didn't want to do it 5 minutes ago, he will now do everything he can to make sure the king is assassinated. So there, the plan is in place, Macbeth is on board, and that sets us up quite nicely for the events of Act 2. I hope you found that useful, and if you did, it'd help me out if you gave the video a like. Thanks for watching, and happy revising.